Brand new reporting gives us an alarming glimpse into the world of Pete Hegseth, his relationship with extremism and violence, as well as the company he keeps. Just this morning, CNN unearthed clips of Hegseth on former House Speaker Newt Gingrich's podcast in the wake of the January 6th insurrection, peddling the completely baseless claim that leftist groups or Antifa staged a false flag operation at the Capitol.
And there are reports, in the New York Post and elsewhere, and just from, common sense, that Antifa folks took advantage of this to try to get to the front and try to agitate and create openings for themselves. They want chaos, ultimately. I could even spot it. You can see the helmets where there's a, Donald Trump bumper sticker on the back, quickly put on it so they could look like they wanted to stop the steal.
Again, and I know you know this, that is completely false. It has been debunked repeatedly, including by the outgoing Trump-appointed FBI director, Christopher Wray. Here's what he said just 2 months after the attack.
Has there so far been any evidence that the January 6th riot here, the insurrection, was organized by people simply posing as supporters of President Trump's?
We have not seen any evidence of that, certainly at this
Is there
stage.
any evidence at all that it was organized or planned or carried out by groups like Antifa or Black Lives Matter?
We have not seen any evidence to that effect thus far in the investigation.
And is there any...
No evidence. But whatever right-wing narratives there are to excuse or whitewash the insurrection, well, Pete Hegseth has been happy to give them a platform. On that same podcast with Newt Gingrich, Hegseth downplayed and justified the attack. It led to several deaths, with more than 140 police officers injured.
I talked to the people on the mall. I've talked to them a lot. Listen, they believe the election was stolen. They wish there were more recourses. They've watched what happens. They've seen stories be suppressed before Hunter Biden, during and after, unwilling to air anything. I mean, the amazing extent to which the media has now taken to taking the official line of secretaries of states or governors and saying, well, this has been fact-checked and debunked because the government officials are telling us that it's not true. When's the last time that's what the media was supposed to do? Reflect and project back upon the populace what government officials are saying because it enhances their narrative. It's unbelievable. So the mindset of these people was not overtly radical. It wasn't violent at all.
His sympathies for those responsible for what the FBI director calls an act of domestic terrorism, adding to the many questions surrounding Hegseth's views. It's worth remembering he has been dogged by questions surrounding his support for extremism. Multiple outlets revealed just last month that Hegseth was deemed a potential insider threat and removed from a National Guard mission protecting President Biden's inauguration when an intelligence officer flagged a tattoo on his bicep with a battle cry that had been brandished on banners by Capitol rioters. Okay, meanwhile, the New York Times has new reporting on the man escorting Hegseth on Capitol Hill. His name is John Hasenbein, a former Army Special Forces Master Sergeant who attacked a civilian during a training exercise in 2019. The New York Times reporting that he, quote, beat a civilian role player, kicking him, punching him, and leaving him hogtied in a pool of his own blood. The Army charged Mr. Hasenbein with aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. A military jury found him guilty of the assault charge in a court-martial in 2020. That's according to Army records. But the judge overseeing the case declared a mistrial after learning that a friend of Mr. Hasenbein had been talking to a juror throughout the trial, court records show. Hasenbein told the New York Times, I have no conviction, and I was honorably retired after 22 years of service. That's all you need to know. An attorney for a firm that represented Hasenbein said that he agreed to retire rather than face another trial. For his part, Hegseth is standing by his security detail. Hegseth's lawyer, Timothy Parlatore, telling the New York Times that Hasenbein is, quote, a victim of unjust treatment by a broken military justice system. And that is where we start today with NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who is in West Palm Beach for us. Also with us, former U.S. Senator and MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill, the CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, retired Army Captain Allison Jaslow is here, and President of Media Matters for America, Angela Corazon. It is good to see you all. Vaughn, let's start with you. And Hegseth's comments, things we have heard him say about what happened on January 6th. Does Donald Trump, do people in Donald Trump's orbit see Hegseth's support for the Capitol rioters as a plus rather than a demerit?
For Donald Trump, he wants to know with his incoming administration, and chief among them, the individual who would lead his next Pentagon, the extent to which they would carry out the orders coming from the Oval Office come 2025 and beyond. And for Donald Trump, knowing Pete Hegseth was somebody who defended his actions, then President Trump's actions on January 6th, but also defended the rioters, the attackers, who went in and stopped the peaceful transfer of power. For Donald Trump, this is, of course, a key component in finding somebody who he is, little question, would be able to serve in a capacity that he would see as sufficient. Because for Pete Hegseth, not only noting and suggesting that it was an inside job, that there was Antifa behind that attack today, we have known time and again that that is not the case. Even a recent DOJ IG report that came out just last week said that there were 4 FBI confidential human sources who were inside of the Capitol that day. But we're talking about thousands of attackers who were Trump supporters, individuals who have pleaded guilty and are even serving time for attacking the Capitol. And for Donald Trump, though, he has propagated over the years the idea that this was an inside job and that he had requested National Guard assistance that was denied, which, of course, is not accurate either. And so for Donald Trump, having Pete Hegseth, somebody who could potentially utilize the military for domestic purposes, as Donald Trump has suggested in the past he would seek to potentially do, this is a key litmus test in finding somebody who he had the utmost belief that he would carry out the duties that he would call on his Pentagon to carry out from the Oval Office.
Fawn, I need not tell you the accusations against Hegseth, they keep mounting. What is the thinking at Mar-a-Lago regarding Hegseth, his chances of getting confirmed?
At this point in time, Donald Trump, he was at the Army-Navy game on Saturday alongside Pete Hegseth, and he has stood by his side here. It was Matt Gaetz who ultimately heard several affirmative no votes that led him to drop his efforts to be the Attorney General in the transition team, is still suggesting that Pete Hegseth has not been given an explicit no from any Republican senator at this point in time. So they intend to continue to move this forward. Of course, these one-on-one meetings are important for him. And at the same time, Donald Trump has suggested that Republican senators up in 2026, like Joni Ernst, Bill Cassidy, Mike Rounds, they could all potentially face challengers, primary challengers in 2026 in this scenario that, in Donald Trump's terms, they were to unreasonably try to block any of his cabinet picks. So as of right now, there are no hard no's. And so at this point in time, Donald Trump and his transition team intend to proceed.
Right. I mean, there's Donald Trump himself, and then there's the hard push we are watching from broader MAGA allies to really get Hegseth into the Pentagon. Why make this the all-hands-on-deck mission?
For Donald Trump, this is a head nod to those who have affirmed loyalty to him and have given Donald Trump the word that they would intend to use their cabinet positions in the departments and agencies that they oversee to fulfill his orders. Donald Trump, I think we have to come back to during the campaign. I was told time and again that he would seek in 2025 to fill his cabinet out with individuals who would not be roadblocks to the executive use of power that he saw fit in his second go-around as president. He blamed in 2017, 2018, much of the slowness in being able to effectuate the change that he so sought on having individuals serving capacities as, for example, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, as well as other top leadership posts, for his inability to effectuate the change that he desired. And by the time they got to 2020 with loyal allies that he felt were properly in these positions, the pandemic hit, and he placed much of the blame for their inability to effectuate that change on the pandemic at that point. So he time and again said that he wanted to make sure that he surrounded himself by people that he had the utmost belief in. And these nominees who he has announced over the course of these last weeks, they represent that. And Donald Trump, true to his word, is standing by them to the very end.
Vaughn Hilliard live for us in West Palm Beach. Vaughn, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your reporting. Allison, I want to look at all of this in the aggregate, the things that Hegseth has said about January 6th, the people he has decided to surround himself with. What message does it send to our men and women in uniform?
I think a couple of things. First of all, there are very concerning aspects of Pete Hegseth's character, which, as you've noted, are being examined in one light today, but there have been multiple examples of concerning parts of, who he is just as a person and who he would then be as a leader of our men and women in uniform. But I think the thing that gets not enough attention is his active lobbying to get convicted war criminals pardoned. These are not war criminals who somebody went after from civilian society, but they were convicted because men who served alongside them and saw the horrors of war with them said that they crossed the line. And you have Navy SEALs that risked their careers to make sure that justice took place and that we held those service members to account, which the military really does well. And if we're going to elevate somebody into the role of Secretary of Defense who seemingly thinks war crimes are okay, that's a big problem. That's a big problem, not just for our men and women in uniform, but for our national security.
And joining me now is Tara Setmeyer, co-founder and CEO of the Seneca Project and former Republican communications director, and David Corn, Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones and MSNBC political analyst. I will start with you, David. I mean, I think a lot of people who watched, and we all watched the January 6th committee day to day, kind of missed Pam Bondi a bit. But she was a lot more involved, and now she will have the reins of the DOJ, theoretically, if she gets confirmed.
We have a government coming in that's full of people who pushed the big lie, which means they try to overturn American democracy. I don't think we fully have absorbed that as a nation. I mean, of course, it's Donald Trump leading the thing, but people he's picking, and even the interviews that they're conducting during the transition, basically asked people, do you believe the election was stolen? So they're only taking Trump big lie loyalists, Kash Patel being one of them. But, the Justice Department, of course, is supposed to protect the laws and defend the Constitution. She doesn't seem to be qualified, given what she did in 2020. But there's another thing here, too. Trump has promised, maybe in the first 9 minutes on the first day, to pardon those rioters that we just showed that attacked the Capitol. The pardon office is in the Justice Department. Pardons, they can go directly from the president, but they're supposed to go through justice. So here you have Pam Bondi, supposed to protect the law, who probably will be involved in this massive operation to pardon the people who tried to overturn the Constitution. It's all absurd. It's all bizarre, and it's what we're going to have to live with for the coming years.
And you take her and you combine her with Kash Patel. What do you get at DOJ?
Yeah, you get a Justice Department that is no longer independent. You have two people who are basically sycophants of Donald Trump that will do whatever he wants, which is what he said he was going to do. And the combination of the two of them together should really scare the hell out of every American who believes in the rule of law. I recently spent time with one of the Capitol Police officers that testified with January 6th. And it broke my heart, because how do you look at those guys and the men and women who defended our democracy in the Capitol that day and say that you can still have faith in our country and our democracy when the American people voted in someone who had no problem with those people assaulting them and defecating and smearing it on the walls of our Capitol and threatening to kill Nancy Pelosi and our own vice president and hang and put gallows. Like, people forget, we have like collective amnesia in this country about what happened on January 6th. And all of them have been rewarded by being put back into power. And it should not be okay. There are millions of Americans who are not okay with this. And they need to express that. And the Democrats need to also show collective anger. If the Democrats are, they're the ones that are immediately in the pathway of letting Donald Trump do everything he wants to do and letting these people do it. They've got to make it more difficult. They may not be empowered directly, but they can still make it more difficult and fight for the tens of millions of Americans who are not okay with this.
And can I just say very quickly, because, on January 20th, when this inauguration happens, to your very good point. And on January 6th of next year, you know, I do think about it. And I've gotten to know some of the Capitol Police officers and the Metro Police officers as well, personally. And I think about them just going to Walmart or Home Depot and having to run into the people who tried to kill them. The person who you know, hit them with a stun gun or bear spray or beat them. And then they are now free because Donald Trump says they're the victim. And then these Capitol Police officers, it breaks my heart to think they're going to walk into some Home Depot somewhere and their assaulter will confront them and literally feel a superiority over them.
Feel emboldened. There's something very fundamentally wrong about that.
Yeah, well, you have Kash Patel, who has put forward the conspiracy theory that, you know, that agitators and Antifa created January 6th, absolving the people who we saw actually doing the violence. And, you know, he and Pam Bondi will be the top law enforcement officers in our land. So people who were there that day fighting the protesters, trying to guard our democracy, or anybody else who's a cop, who's now a Capitol Hill police officer, they're going to look up and say, these people, they're supporting the criminals and the thugs who try to destroy the constitutional order. What does that mean for me when it comes to me putting my life on the line?
Well, there's a certain oxymoron here. It's the lawless now in charge of the law. What does that say? And it just is so infuriating that the American people, even though they said, well, no, we don't think that's a good idea, but we're going to vote for Donald Trump anyway. I mean, we have to defend our institutions. We have to defend those concepts still if we think that we're still going to have a country that we can be proud of. It's time for Democrats to step up, and for those of us, even though we can get exhausted, but that's what they want you to do. Right. They want you to be exhausted.
Let me go to another institution.
The moment.
This is an institution I think matters a lot. It's the military.
Yes.
You know, it's typically been the most respected institution in the country. I want you to listen to Pete Hegseth, who is theoretically the person who would be manning and in charge of the 3 million members of our United States military. Here he is on a podcast, Newt Gingrich's podcast back in 2021, and listen to what he said about January 6th. Take a listen.
There are reports, you know, in the New York Post and elsewhere, and just from, you know, common sense, that Antifa folks took advantage of this to try to get to the front and try to agitate and create openings for themselves. They want chaos, ultimately. I could even spot it. You can see the helmets where there's a, you know, Donald Trump bumper sticker on the back, quickly put on it so they could look like they wanted to stop the steal, but what they really wanted to do was further the narrative.
That's not true. And he would be in charge of the military that theoretically would be unleashed on American protesters. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, it's not even not true. It's crazy. And it's Soviet style. We're going to tell you that you didn't see what you saw with your own eyes. We're going to make
on TV.
Yeah, on TV. We're going to make up a cover story that somehow a few people infiltrated this and got thousands of Trump supporters to break down the doors and, you know, and deface the Capitol. And we're going to expect you to buy it and believe it. I mean, going back to Pam Bondi, and we saw her in those press conferences, she is lying. She's saying there's evidence of massive fraud when there wasn't.
Right.
I mean, you can say we want to look at things. We have some concerns.
You can file as many lawsuits as you want as a candidate.
But they just said it was massive fraud. They supported a guy who declared victory before the votes were counted.
But see,
and now they want to be taken seriously.
This is where the Republicans, who, if they had any decency and actually believed in the oath that they swear to the Constitution, that they would question all of this during the confirmation hearings and say, and that's why I'm not voting for you, because you are unqualified. This is disqualifying. You are part of something that went to the strikes to the heart of our cornerstone of our democracy, and you are part of it. You are not qualified to be the leader of the Department of Justice.
In a million years, think anyone would do that? Lindsey Graham won't do it.
Unfortunately, that's my point.
None of them.
That's my point. But to your earlier point,
and they need to be held. They need to be shamed for it.
Yeah, that's a bridge too far.
They'll never.
To your earlier point, I want to see the Democrats get up there and say, you said that there was massive fraud. Was there massive fraud?
Yes.
Do you believe there was massive fraud? Are you lying? How can you say you want to run the military, which involves processing intelligence and analyzing things? You really believe that Antifa stirred that up? I want them to ask Kash Patel about his exaggerated claim that he was the lead prosecutor on the Benghazi case when he wasn't.
I want all of those things.
But to do it not politely.
No.
fiercely with the point that,
Yes.
if they're going to get through, they
Yes.
got to be told, Robert Kennedy, why did you lie about
And here's the thing that
measles and
Democrats don't
Samoa?
understand is that the confirmation hearings are a television show.
That's correct.
It's a television program. You probably cannot stop the nomination, but you can put things in the record that the American people cannot look away from. Democrats do not have the power to stop these people from becoming defense secretary or becoming attorney general, but you cannot make it, you can make it hard.
That's right.
And you can make it unpleasant and you can make it uncomfortable and force the American people, even watching Fox, who are watching that show, to get access to the truth, give them access to the truth, because trust me, Trump and his team will give them no access to the truth. Tara Setmeyer, David Corn, it's dark days, but we love having friends around to commiserate.
Do not obey in advance.
Do not obey in advance. Anticipatory compliance is a bad idea in democracy, and we're still a democracy. And yeah, being a republic doesn't mean you're not a democracy. Look it up. Tara Setmeyer, David Corn, thank you very much.
What would it even mean to deauthorize a vaccine or even just to pull back on vaccine mandates? How exactly would that work? And what would people be at a risk of afterward? Joining us now to explore that, senior national correspondent for HuffPost and author of The 10-Year War, Obamacare and the Unfinished Crusade for Universal Coverage, Jonathan Cohn. The dean of Brown University's School of Public Health and former Biden White House COVID-19 response coordinator, Dr. Ashish Jha, and New York Times opinion columnist David French. So, Dr. Jha, I'm going to begin with you on that. If say RFK Jr. does get confirmed and he's able to put people in place that also are skeptical of vaccines, to put it mildly, if he wanted a vaccine revoked, taken off the market, what's the process?
Yes, first of all, Katie, thanks for having me here. Look, there are a lot of things that the HHS secretary can do, and he is putting his people in key positions across the agency. He can put pressure on the FDA to revoke the authorization of the polio vaccine, the measles vaccine, any vaccine he wants. One of the things that he can do quite easily is gut the childhood vaccination program. By the way, half the kids in America get their vaccines through this program. So even if he doesn't revoke the vaccine, he can make it much, much harder for kids to get those vaccines. And the consequences are going to be that we're going to have a lot more kids getting sick, a lot more kids dying of things that we thought were in our rearview mirror, not things that we thought we would be battling in 2024 or 2025.
Jonathan, can you expand on that a little bit, just the process by which you would make it harder to get one of these vaccines?
Yeah, I mean, he has a secretary of HHS, Robert Kennedy, would have all kinds of levers to influence what vaccines are given or required. And there's a whole range of things. So first of all, there are advisory committees throughout HHS that do things like set a recommended vaccine schedule or decide what Medicare and Medicaid are going to reimburse. As secretary of HHS, he would have the ability to take people off or put people onto those committees. He would also, for example, be in a position to decide how HHS enters in litigation over vaccines. You know, there's a ton of lawsuits out there all the time about vaccines. HHS routinely weighs in these court cases on behalf of vaccination. If HHS does not weigh in, those are harder cases to win. And by the way, a lot of those cases are being filed by a lawyer who is now one of Kennedy's top advisors on these issues.
In talking about RFK Jr. today, President-elect Trump said something that just confused me, and I'm hoping one of you can help me understand it. Let me just play what he said about RFK Jr. and alluding to the skepticism that he has surrounding vaccines.
I think he's going to be much less radical than you would think. I think he's got a very open mind, or I wouldn't have put him there. He's going to be very much less radical. But there are problems. I mean, we don't do as well as a lot of other nations, and those nations use nothing. And we're going to find out what those problems are.
What is he talking about, Dr. Jha? We have a lot of problems and a lot of other nations, and those nations use nothing. It seems like what he's saying is we have problems because we have vaccines, and other nations don't have these problems because they don't have vaccines?
Yeah, so first of all, there's no country in the world that doesn't vaccinate their kids at all. I mean, there are definitely some very, very poor countries that cannot vaccinate sort of fully the way we are able to. Those countries have much, much higher rates of measles and all these other conditions, and their kids do much worse than us. So the issue here is, look, these vaccines have all gone through very rigorous testing. I think it's always fine to look at the data again and ask the question, is each one of these still necessary? That's a reasonable discussion to have, but that's got to be guided by evidence and science and data. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., unfortunately, is somebody who says he doesn't know that there are any vaccines that are safe or effective. He's going to have an enormous impact on what happens to the vaccine program, among other things, for our country.
And folks, if I've got to interrupt you, I'm so sorry. We're waiting for the Madison, Wisconsin police chief, Sean Barnes, to give us an update on the school shooting, that other major story that we're covering out of Madison, Wisconsin. We're going to go there when it begins. He should be close. And David, I want to sneak in at least one more question to you, and this is regarding Republican senators. You heard those strong words from Mitch McConnell regarding the polio vaccine. He had a brush with polio as a child. Do you expect that there are going to be Republican senators who are going to say, hey, maybe this is a bridge too far for me?
I think it's very possible. And I think what we have to do is remind Republican senators that RFK's power is going to extend beyond the legal mechanisms we've been talking about. A lot of folks have a lot of faith that bureaucratic inertia will sort of block the most radical elements of the Trump program. But the reality is, RFK has power beyond just the legal levers. He has the power of the bully pulpit, and he's going to get out there and he's going to constantly undermine American faith and confidence in life-saving vaccines. And that's actually something I worry about as much or maybe even more than some of these legal maneuvers, because you undermine that trust enough, you're going to see many more parents refusing vaccines for their kids. You're going to see all of these secondary effects that we've talked about, perhaps even without legal reform or legal change. And so the senators need to know that RFK can do immense damage in that position, even if there are other sort of legal, institutional, bureaucratic checks on his ability to affect legal change. He can affect cultural change just sitting in that seat.
Dr. Shah, that's a really good point from David, just undermining public confidence. I've got friends who are skeptical of vaccinating their own children, smart friends who are worried about it. What happens if there are now a number of parents who say, I don't really feel like I need to do this. Polio is not a problem. I shouldn't get the polio vaccine. MMR, not a problem. I shouldn't get the MMR vaccine.
Yeah, so first and foremost, one of the things that I've always loved about our country is that vaccine confidence was always actually quite bipartisan. I remind my friends that in 2019, the most vaccinated state when it comes to kids was Mississippi, and one of the least vaccinated states was actually California before it passed some laws to change that. This has not been a partisan issue. I worry deeply that we are making this a partisan issue. Unfortunately, what I think the consequences will be is we are going to see kids getting sick. We've already started seeing that with measles, with whooping cough. We're going to see kids getting sick, and unfortunately, even some kids dying of diseases that should be preventable. I worry it's going to take that to get action back on track. Obviously, we've all got to do everything we can to prevent that. But that is the concern I have, that until that happens, some people are going to be just sort of, lulled into complacency on this. No, you haven't seen polio. That's because everybody's getting vaccinated. We don't need to make polio come back.
Yeah. And Jonathan, just one last point on the bureaucracy of all this. We're talking about undermining public confidence. That's a risk. But what about the bureaucratic inertia, as David was saying, that people will just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, don't worry, the institutions don't move quickly enough for Donald Trump to do any real lasting damage?
Yeah, I think David was exactly right. And I would say we're already seeing that damage in real time. 2 hours ago when Donald Trump was speaking and that clip you played, and he's, I'm for the polio vaccine, but maybe we have some problems. That is a perfect example. There's a lot of people, they're going to hear that. They're going to say, Donald Trump, who they trust, who is the president of the United States, introducing some doubt about vaccines. Maybe they're not that safe. And, because of that, fewer people are going to get vaccines. And you repeat that over and over again. That is how you get to a situation where we see the level of vaccination drop to dangerous levels. We see more outbreaks like we're already starting to see now, and we become a less healthy, more dangerous country.
100%.
So the New York Times has new reporting on the man who has been escorting Pete Hegseth around Capitol Hill this month. According to the paper, John Hazenbein is a former Army Special Forces Master Sergeant who left the military after attacking a civilian during a training exercise back in 2019. So this is the guy who's escorting Hegseth around Capitol Hill now. Witnesses
to the
said,
senator's offices.
right.
The senator's office.
Witnesses said he beat the civilian role player who is a former member of Iraq's Army elite counterterrorism service, kicking him, punching him, and leaving him hogtied in a pool of his own blood. Among other injuries, the civilian was left with a broken nose, a broken tooth, a sprained shoulder, a scalp hematoma, and blunt facial trauma, according to memos and statements by company employees about the episode. The Army charged Hazenbein with aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. A military jury found him guilty of the assault charge in a court-martial in 2020, according to Army records. But the judge overseeing the case declared a mistrial after learning that a friend of Hazenbein had been talking to a juror throughout the trial, court records show. The Army did not retry the case. In a statement to the Times, Hazenbein said, "I have no conviction," and was honorably retired after 22 years of service. That's all you need to know.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, he was given the choice of being retried or leaving, and I think that's how it happened. But it's beyond. I mean, beyond telling Jonathan O'Meara, when his nomination is already on life support, that he brings a guy like this that has been charged with this by the United States military. Right? That's the thing. The United States military of beating the hell out of someone in a military exercise and being charged for it. I mean, a guy who's a U.S. citizen now being charged for it, and he has no better judgment than that. This is who he is. This is who he has been. He went time and time again to Donald Trump, didn't he, and tried to get people that were charged in the military for abusive behavior, and he became champions of abusers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the important context here. That's how he got on Donald Trump's radar to begin with, is that he would defend members of the military who were accused of misconduct, some of them in matters of abuse or worse, and that he was able to successfully get some of them, clemency from the President of the United States. The Hegseth camp is saying that this is a sign of loyalty, that he's sticking with his guys, no matter what the accusation was, then this is what he's going to bring to the Pentagon, defend those who serve the country and stand up for those
There are a lot of
people
who serve the country who in military exercises, and I know, because on the Armed Services Committee, I get to see a lot of the military exercises. They don't kick the hell out of somebody. They don't kick them in the ribs. They don't hog tie them. They don't chip their tooth. They don't leave them in a pool of blood. There are a lot of people, a lot of honorable men and women that serve in the military that could have been escorting him around like that. But it's almost like he's constantly got to prove a point.
Yeah, every bit of that is right. He had other options. This is a deliberate choice, a signal that he's sending, in part because I am told he thinks Donald Trump respects that. The idea of doubling down, fighting, don't give an inch. We will see if that plays out in the politics, though, of his confirmation choice, because we already know there are a number of senators who've expressed reservations, public and private, about Hegseth's conduct, about his judgment. This is a matter of judgment here. And we also, reporting shows, including folks that I talked to yesterday, that though Trump is still supporting this pick, he took him to the Army Navy game, as you noted, but he hasn't gone fully to bat for him yet. He has not personally said, Hegseth's my guy. He hasn't called those senators. Posted on Truth Social, but hasn't called.
They think more things are coming out.
There's an expectation that more's coming, and Hegseth is still a few votes short.
All those senators are just saying,
this wasn't it?
All these senators are saying, why do I have to say anything when gravity's going to do all my work for me? Right. That's what they're thinking. So when you hear them going, oh, hey, let's let the process play out. Let's see what happens.
How could there be more?
We're just going to wait. We'll process, play out means, we're going to just sit there and watch him and watch the gravity pull him through with weight of more things coming out.
So, Jackie, you obviously cover these members every single day. What's your sense of how or how not this has evolved? There was great skepticism a couple of weeks ago around Pete Hegseth. It seemed like he was doomed. It's a little bit of a tone shift, at least, from someone like Senator Ernst last week, but not a full endorsement by any stretch of the imagination. What's your sense of where things are now with his nomination, potential nomination, and where they're headed?
I think this wait and see posture, wait until there's more FBI background checks, wait until we get closer to the process and keep quiet until then is the strategy that most senators are currently employing, doing everything behind closed doors after seeing Joni Ernst take a radically different approach that staffers and members that we've spoken to were really critical of, who said she sort of overshot her own power and influence by going out on Fox News, getting ahead of herself, saying that she was not ready to support Hegseth in a pretty public way, having sort of triggering this public criticism and full court press on her from MAGA world, and then 4 days later backtracking on it in a way that sort of damages her credibility and also her standing in Trump world. You're seeing the rest of these senators now learning a very different lesson from her actions. But we have seen a slight win for some Republican senators. Tom Fox successfully was one of the people who lobbied Trump to step down from considering Amaryllis Fox Kennedy, who was being proposed to be the CIA #2, the deputy to John Ratcliffe, after some private conversations and concerns raised with Trump directly about Kennedy's past comments and statements and beliefs about the CIA. Trump ultimately decided that he wasn't going to consider her anymore. And this was done in a very stealth way behind closed doors. You know, Cotton, along with some other Republican senators, have a very ideological approach to, foreign intervention and foreign espionage and sort of some of these subversive espionage tactics that the CIA does, and that Cotton, in particular, has viewed as very valuable to U.S. intelligence and communicated those concerns and was successful in his lobbying. So I think this is sort of the approach that we're going to see going forward, because so far you haven't really seen many other public specific criticisms of people who might have similar problems to Amaryllis Fox, such as Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, Gene Robinson, it seems that everybody has taken the let's wait and see. No need to have people screaming at us, and our staff members over Christmas holidays were saying we're not going to support a Trump pick. It's a let's let the FBI investigations, let's let the further newspaper investigations take its course, and then you'll see probably people like Murkowski, Collins, who's got to win in a very blue state 2 years from now, Mitch McConnell, maybe Cassidy, who's already voted against impeachment, doing what they will likely do, especially on Hegseth and Gabbard's. But you know what? That's what was so interesting yesterday, and what Donald Trump said at the end of that statement we played, which is, if you disagree with them, if you disagree with their policies, if you disagree with them personally for those positions, I get it. Which is sort of, I think,
some space.
It's extraordinarily telling, and a lot of space, and it's a lot different than what all these outside groups are doing to try to make money on this.
Yeah, Donald Trump is not going to the mat for these nominees, not for Hegseth, not for Gabbard. Maybe he is for RFK Jr., and I think he'll likely get him through. But look, I come back to what you were saying at the beginning of the segment, which is Pete Hegseth is in no way qualified to be Secretary of Defense, and that's just I think those senators that you mentioned and probably others really can't get past that. I'm not sure they could get past the fact of this guy walking around with him who was court-martialed for that horrific incident, but he's look. The world is on fire. The U.S. has forces around the globe and is constantly moving resources and people here and there, trying to trying to put out the flare-ups of these fires as best it can, to keep our people as best we can out of harm's way while while fulfilling missions. That's enormously complicated, and it takes somebody who really knows the military inside out, who knows the Pentagon inside out, who knows what levers to push and pull. And Hexas has none of that, and it would just be madness to have somebody like that running the Defense Department now. It's just not acceptable. And then of course Tulsi Gabbard presents a whole different set of issues around the question of loyalty, frankly.
Well, yeah, loyalty to Syria, loyalty to Russia. I mean, the loyalty, it's really, really bizarre. Yeah, but again, even with Pete Hegseth, as we said, not qualified and yet still doing things.
Yeah.
Even yesterday, where he gets a guy who's charged, and we went through the details, just beating the hell out of somebody that was there to help them with an exercise. And then, the case thrown out on a technicality. But the facts are still there, and Hegseth knows it, and I guess wants to prove a point that he can.
Right in your face.
He can champion people that have been accused of abusing others in the military.